Pat, go ahead and sing
Now I
for
want to
us.
sing a prophecy song of when the earth is restored to harmony, balance, and beauty. Awamari upata pawarari uua takarupua ejeje ejeje awamari upata pawarari uua takarupua ejeje ejeje awamari upata pawara riua takarupua ejeje ejeje awamari upata pawara riua takarupua ejeje ejeje. Hmm. Yeah, that was a prophecy song that was brought to North America from South America by a son and his very elder mom from deep, deep, deep in the rainforest. Yeah.
Mm, Thank you so much, Pat,
Yeah.
for that song, that calling and a prophecy, and for being an anchor in this initiative and in this movement. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. You are here in the Motherhouse Starter Series, the foundational course for mother law and complicit no more. This is session 6 of this starter series, 6 of 7. And today we'll be focused on remothering our theology, looking at Mother Mary, the Magnificat, and the Black Madonna from a womanist perspective. Hopefully you've been with us in this series so you know what this Motherhouse Starter Series is all about, mother law and complicit no more. And hopefully you also know a bit about the relationships and movement context that it comes from. Just to say it briefly, we're here together for this starter series to springboard our own remembering, to reclaim our authority and the mother law that lives within the seeds of our own cultures and lineages. As Pat would say, we're here to put life at the center of all we do and to start living towards right relationship right now. We are Land Justice Futures, and we work with movement partners and religious communities to create land transitions rooted in ecological and racial healing. We seek to heal stories on sacred lands, to liberate land and relationships from colonial constraints in service of life. You can learn more about our work and our Focus Community Program and other public educational offerings about land justice from our website, which is being dropped in the chat. Before we dive in, it is important to name that today is October 7th, a day that marks a full year of war and genocide in Palestine. Though we understand that this war sits within a context of decades of ethnic cleansing, apartheid, siege, and occupation. Today we grieve the 1,200 Israeli lives taken by Hamas and the Israeli military on that day. We worry for the hostages that are still missing, and we grieve for the more than 41,000 Palestinian people, including over 16,000 children, killed by Israel in the years since. We worry for everyone in the region whose lives are at stake. Experts cite that the true toll thus far is likely between 100 and 200,000 people. And 1 year in, Gaza is leveled to the ground. The occupied West Bank is being ethnically cleansed. And the war is expanding into a larger regional war or even world war, as Israel is currently bombing densely populated areas of Lebanon, and as Iran, Syria, and Yemen are also pulled into the war. Last March, we hosted Palestinian American peace activist Jonathan Brenneman and Jewish American rabbi Jessica Rosenberg in a conversation about Israel and Palestine, which we'd recommend. And you can see the link in the chat for checking that out. What's happening in Palestine, Israel, and Lebanon is deeply related to this movement for mother law and complicit no more. Many Indigenous activists here on Turtle Island, like Nick Estes and Jen Marley, speak of how Palestine is the tip of the spear in decolonization and finding a new path forward, for ending the power over paradigm and the domination codes that we have inherited through imperialism, settler colonialism, patriarchy, and racist capitalism. By being complicit no more, we seek ways of being that are life nurturing, true to the good relatives that humans can be. We seek mother law. This photograph that you see here by Abed Al-Rahim Kusini and distributed by the UN speaks to this work of mother law and complicit no more. In this photo, taken in 2005, a Palestinian woman is crying and hugging an olive tree after Israeli settlers and army cut down the grove in the village of Salem near Nablus. We've seen countless images of parents holding their lifeless children in this last year. And here this woman grieves the loss of her relatives in the land. It is an image that speaks to one's place in the world, one's belonging with others, belonging to life, to a land, to a people, to a lineage and way of life, and to each other. In a world of empire, where success is calculated by what is conquered, destroyed, and taken, we refuse to be separated. We cry out. We give our tears to the roots of life. Like this woman's arms around the tree and her voice that we can conjure in our minds. The human spirit is strong, surviving, remembering, reviving. It's our hope, by weaving together the strength of women and allies from many lineages that are surviving, remembering, and reviving what is life-giving, that we can end our complicity with this death spiral of a system. We can reawaken the seeds of mother law within us, and we can stand in power together. Let us take a moment to mourn and remember the unfathomable cost of this war, this genocide, and commit ourselves to liberation and life. Okay. Thank you, Amy, for sharing that. Where we are at in this series, we are nearing the end of this starter series for Motherhouse. Today, we'll be resourcing ourselves for the work ahead by looking to what remains of a mothering God or mother law within the Christian tradition. We'll look to Mary, the Magnificat, and womanist perspectives with Reverend Kelly Brown Douglas. And after this session, next week, we'll be moving towards praxis. That is, integrating theory and our real, on-the-ground lives, initiating a cycle of learning, action, and reflection. Next week will be us stepping towards that. We're offering a pop-up 1-hour praxis session for metabolizing and integrating the series, as well as moving to apply it into our lives and understanding what next steps might be. After that, 2 weeks after that, specifically on October 28th, we'll formally close this starter series as we began with our partner, Michelle Shenandoah of Rematriation. And we'll talk about what it means to be part of this movement of Complicit No More and Mother Law. This will be space for honoring the longer story that we are stepping into, name where we go from here, and cross the threshold together into what's next. And just as we are moving towards wrapping this series, it's important to note, our goal with this series has been to initiate and develop a particular lens. And so this is just a beginning. And that's at least what we hope it is, a beginning, which then we can continue to cultivate and practice and weave that lens into our lives in committed ways. So we want you to rest assured that we're going to keep tending to this impulse, this commitment, with new offerings and ways of staying connected and deepening together after the starter series ends. The many ways that come through us in the praxis session and the closing session on the 7th will illuminate the way forward. It's hard to swim upstream, and we need community, and we need each other to do this. Likewise, this is long work. This is a lifetime of work. Complicit No More and Mother-in-Law is going to be, is already generational work, and it'll be generational work that we continue with our own lifetimes. And likewise, we just want everyone here to be prepared and not be surprised when this is kind of a long tail integration, and will require continued formation in the future. We are revealing a domination code that goes really deep into the substructure of our society. And, sometimes we can have a big aha moment experience and just think we've got it. But then actually weeks and months and years later, things keep bubbling up and shifting and focusing. So we just want you to be cognizant of that and welcome that. And allow what has transpired in these weeks to continue to shape you. So this is the work of generations, of lifetimes, and we're going to care for that. And we're going to offer ways to stay connected in this process together. And then just lastly, some logistics before we get into some grounding. The course page is there for you. It's where you can find most of what you'll need: homework, replays, community guidelines. We ask that folks remain on mute unless we're inviting folks to speak. And for breakouts, again, if you'd like to be put in a BIPOC only caucus space, please add the letter B to the front of your name on Zoom. If you have trouble with that, you can just direct message Amy. And then lastly, just a request to be mindful of the chat, as it can be a little distracting if folks are in there adding a lot of stuff. If there's a resource that you think is very on topic and would like the group to know about, please email it to us at hello@landjusticefutures.org, and we'll try to include it in a follow-up. And that's also the email you can use for any other questions or requests. All right, that is some of the framing for today. Brittany, I'm going to hand it over to you to ground us with where we're at and with a little bit of breathing.
Thanks, Sarah. Welcome back, everybody. I'm just going to lead us in a couple minutes of grounding. And with that, I'm going to ask Amy to share the link to the haikus in the chat. So last week, for those of you who are with us, we spent some time processing the first 4 sessions of the course. And we asked you each to write a haiku about what you're learning and what's coming alive for you. And what came through was really, really moving to our whole team. And we've been sitting with these words for a week, and we'd like to spend a couple minutes with you just breathing in that wisdom. So the link to all the haikus, which we pieced together, are in the chat. I'm also going to screen share them. Or Amy, I don't know if you might be able to screen share them. I'm still having audio issues.
I'm happy to.
Thank you. And we're going to take 2 minutes here. And the invitation is just to let your eyes rest and be drawn to a phrase, a single poem, a word. Just be with that wisdom. There's no need to read them all. You can read them all later if you want. Just let your eyes move over them and sit with one or two that call out to you. So I'd like to invite 2 or 3 participants. There was a particular haiku that spoke to you. Would you just raise your hand? Click that hand raise button. Who's got a word or a phrase or a poem that is really sitting with you, really alive for you? Okay, we got 1 hand raised. I'm looking for 2 or 3 more. Thank you, Sister Barbara. I'm calling you in a second. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Bridget. So first Barbara, then Lucy, then Bridget. I'm going to invite you in a moment to just speak the haiku or the phrase. And after each one of these, we're just going to take a breath and let the wisdom of those words be with us. And with each one, we'll take a breath in, breathing in our belonging to this movement, and breathing out our need for certainty. So, Barbara, you first.
Do not look away. Broken promises unstitched. Mother-law song rise.
Healing, mending bones of land and soul, impossible no more.
I am alive to remember the way to heal, to make our world new.
Take a breath in. We breathe in our belonging to this movement. We breathe out our need for certainty. And I see 3 more hands. Sarah, should I or should we move on? Okay, so Mary Helen and Sharon, if you'd like to share yours.
I come from time past, turbulent, violent, yet love brought me here now.
This history is so much deeper than I ever imagined.
And Lucy, I saw a Lucy raise her hand. Another Lucy.
It's left of.
Okay. Okay, this time we'll use this prompt as we take a breath together. We breathe in the seeds of mother law. And we breathe out and release our complicity. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. And thank you to the wisdom of the collective here with us. Grateful for the ways in which we are already showing each other the way. I would love to bring up here our speaker today, Reverend Kelly Brown Douglas. Hello, it's good to have you here.
Good to be here.
Thank you, thank you. For everyone here, Reverend Kelly is a womanist theologian and professor at Harvard Divinity School, at Union Seminary, and the Washington National Cathedral. Just some bits from her bio. It's also on our website if you want to read more. Reverend Douglas has been the interim president and dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary and a professor of theology. She also serves as the canon theologian at the Washington National Cathedral and the theologian in residence at Trinity Church, Wall Street. Prior to Union, she was a professor and associate professor at Goucher College and Howard University School of Divinity and Edward Waters College. Ordained as an Episcopal priest in 1983, Douglas holds a master's degree in theology and a PhD in systematic theology from Union. Douglas is the author of many articles and 6 books, including Sexuality and the Black Church, A Womanist Perspective, Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God, and Resurrection Hope, A Future Where Black Lives Matter. Her academic work has focused on womanist theology, sexuality, and the Black Church. Thank you so much, Reverend Kelly, for being here.
Thank you really for inviting me into this space. It is clear that this space is sacred space, and a sacred space for learning and dialogue, and boy, the work that you all are doing. And so, Sarah, I just thank you for the opportunity to share at least on this day and to learn with you.
Well, thank you, and I just it's kind of wild and incredible to be at this point in the series, moving towards wrapping just this foundational course. And I think it's really fitting that you're here to talk with us about what it means to remother our theology, what it means to find mother law within Christianity, find the remnants of it, find what's healthy, find what might need to be thrown out, and what can really resource us in this work for mother law and being complicit no more. And before we dive in, I wonder if, for folks who might be less familiar, can you share a little bit about what is womanist theology and what does it mean to be a womanist theologian?
Yes, I can, and thank you. And I, again, before I do that, if I may,
Please.
if you're pushing, even as we find ourselves on this day, right? That is October 7th. And I so appreciate your opening and your the way in which you have spoken about this day. And it certainly, which is continuous with what you are doing with Land Futures. It calls this day, and as we think about a year ago and the ongoing genocidal war in Palestine and the region, it makes clear that there is a need for a paradigm shift in the way in which we think about how we make peace. And peace means justice. And so, and I am consistently, so we've gone through this year and it continues, reminded that peace never comes through war, and that when we speak of justice, to talk about retributive justice is an anomaly. There is no such thing as retributive justice. Justice always emerges from out of love, right? And that begins with respecting the sacred humanity of all that God has brought into existence, including every single solitary human being. And it seems to me that what you're doing here is about a paradigm shift that, again, allows us to really open up our moral imaginary of what justice looks like. And when we move toward justice, that always has to start, from my perspective, and this will get into when we see from the vantage point of those who have been on the raw underside of justice, those who have been impacted most significantly by realities of injustice, because they are the ones that can begin to articulate what justice looks like, and justice, and not get it confused with privilege, right? The privilege that emerges from cultures and of domination and of power. And that, to me, and what you're doing here, that is where mother law becomes so crucial. It's reclaiming that and shifting the paradigm. And I appreciate the words that you spoke as well at the beginning, that this is not once and for all work. It took us a long time to get here. It's going to take us a long time to get out of this, to shift the paradigm. But it requires everybody doing, in the little, I like to say, in the little space of the garden that we have been granted to live in. It requires us to do our work of, I like to say, tilling the land and tilling the soil, and so that we can uproot rather what is there and plant something new. So anyway, that's my little prolegometer. The word, not so little, right? I'm an Episcopalian. I'm not supposed to talk that long. But
you can talk as long as you want.
No, but I so appreciate it. You framing this in this day that we find ourselves in at this quote unquote anniversary. But you asked me what womanist is. Well, that's a part of it. But what womanist theology is, and what it means to be a womanist. Let me first begin here with where that word comes from, right? So in 1979, Alice Walker first, who is many of you recognize her name as the Pulitzer Prize winning novelist of Color Purple. That's when she first sort of entered into a lot of people's sort of imagination and awareness. But she did a lot before The Color Purple. But in 1979, she coined the term womanist, really, in a short story called Coming Apart. And then in 1981, she authored an anthology called In Search of Our Mother's Garden, A Womanist Prose. And in the front of that, she offered a 4-part definition of womanist. And she said, womanist comes from when it's a part of African American culture, when your mother would say to a Black daughter, you acting womanish. And it means, knowing more than you ought to, being stubborn, all of those things. And in that 4-part definition, she also said that to be a womanist is to love yourself regardless. To be a womanist is not to be a separatist, except sometimes for health. To be a womanist is to be for the survival and wholeness of entire peoples, male and female. To be a womanist is to love, and it's just a long definition of love, and to love women sexually and or non-sexually, men sexually and or non-sexually. And she goes on, and then she finally says, a womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. Now, yeah, you get that? Womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. Now, this term, and like 1981, when this womanist prose anthology came out in Search for Our Mother's Garden, and in the early 80s, began its, as Cheryl Townsend Jokes, who was a sociologist, said, a Black female sociologist, it began to pop up all over like popcorn. Black women, particularly in religion, Black women in religious studies, began to adopt this term. I remember when I first saw it. You know, you get a book and you buy a book and you put it on your shelf and think somehow by osmosis it's going to end up sinking in your head, and you look smart because it's on your shelf. And one day, and really procrastinating or being blocked trying to write my dissertation, I saw the book, I pulled it down from the shelf and I opened it up, and there was this definition. I said, that's who I am. Because what it did is it really became, you know, it's like this symbol helping Black women to understand our own experience. There had never been a term that gave life to who we were and the uniqueness of what it meant to be Black and female. And so we're always in this sort of middle space, right? Between race and between feminism, between, you know, so we fight for racial justice, but we know that, you know, that began to be focused on these things of manhood and all of that. And then so if it's sort of like that early suffragettes movement and that fight for the vote, if Black men get the right to vote, we don't get the right to vote because we're women, then the suffragettes fought for women to get the right to vote, but we still don't get the right to vote because we Black. And so so nothing ever sort of felt right. And the feminist movement didn't feel right because they weren't taking into account what it meant for Black women, weren't taking into account race. And so that's where you got this sort of interlocking, interactive realities of experience. And so womanist signals the experiences and lived realities of Black women, what it means to be Black and female. And so womanist theology, you know, people say theology is like, oh Lord, what is a theology? I always say it's faith-seeking understanding, trying to understand, right, your faith and the meaning of your faith as you navigate life. And so womanist theology is all about seeking to understand our faith as we try to navigate the complex and complicated realities of what it means to be Black and woman in a world, in a society that negates and does not affirm the identity of and is hostile to what it means to be Black and to what it means to be woman. And so, in not quite a nutshell, a large nutshell, right? That to answer your question, that's what womanist theology is all about. And yeah, so I'll stop there. And we can talk about what that means for mothering and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the weaving of story and where that word comes from, and also just this image of lavender and purple.
Yeah.
I love that. And also I feel like I should weave in, like, the Haudenosaunee colors on their flag are purple. It's a sacred color. And it's the colors of that wampum belt from that we saw in session 1 about mother-in-law. So I'm making these connections, and I'm loving this lavender purple distinction around feminism and around womanism, and curious about its connection with mother-in-law.
Yeah, no, I'm good to hear the significance of purple. And womanists now, sort of our color is purple, right? Now, and so a lot of the symbols and stuff that we use, and when we come together in places, it's like you wear purple. And purple has always stood in sort of an African cultural context for royalty, right? And so all of those things come together, but clearly it also emerges because of Alice Walker's The Color Purple, and how Alice Walker talked about purple standing out in a field, and so so that color symbolism, and I just love to hear the connections in our use of purple.
Yeah, sovereignty of purple.
Yeah, I like that.
The sovereignty of purple, the sovereignty of the mother. I'm curious,
Yes.
you have focused, with your womanist perspective. I'm so curious about what you see as mothering traditions that exist within Christianity, and which ones are like loud and right there in our face that we could resource from or understand in a new way, and which ones are hidden and might be obscured from view. And yeah, just what's your sense as a womanist theologian about
No, thank you. So the first thing I have to say as a womanist who takes Black women's experience obviously seriously and as my starting point, and always informed by that experience, past and present, and and how we create and shape a new future. And so taking that serious, as then I have to begin with emphasizing the way in which motherhood for Black women has been contested, has never been respected, and as Black women as mothers has often been a source of critique, even as Black women have not been allowed to be mothers to their own families, right? And so to claim and to respect what it has meant for us to be mothers, even as the children, if you will, that we have mothered, recognizing that those children that we have mothered as Black women have also not been respected. And so one thing that we do as womenist theologians is we reclaim our stories as women. And as we do that, we reclaim not simply the way we have been put upon, if you will, but also the way we have resisted. And so Black women as mothers has been a contested reality, and continues to be so today. And I'll just real quick highlight a couple of things and then connect that as you talk about Christianity. We know that as Black women were enslaved and thought of course, as chattel, but we were thought of as producing property for our slave owners, right? And so that the children that Black mothers brought forth weren't their children. They produced labor. And so they were laboring in sort of in all aspects of that term. And so there was never a respect for the relationship between mother and child, because we know that children were stripped away from families and from their mothers. And yet, with no respect for that, Black women were used to nurse and mother white children. This is going to take us to this Mother Earth kind of phenomenon. Even as we weren't thought of as being human, so how no sense of what it meant to have any kind of emotional ties to other human beings who happen to be blessed with ebony grace, and to be Black. And even as we move forward, some of us will recall, some of you will recall that even during the 1960s, Pat Moynihan came out with the Moynihan Report, and once again berated Black mothers and said that we were responsible for the downfall of our community. And even today, right, when we look simply at the way in which Black maternal health is disregarded and the way in which Black women still have the highest mortality rate in terms of maternal mortality rate. And we know the stories, and I would commend to anyone that has an opportunity to go down to Montgomery, Alabama to see the installation of the Mothers of Gynecology that a Black female artist has done, that sort of, again, in that is the history of the way in which Black mothers have not been respected, and how that shows itself in the way Black women's maternal health has been disregarded. So that's the first thing, that I want to say when we talk about motherhood. Is we must be cognizant of what it means to be Black and female, and just try to be respected as a mother, and for those whom we mother to be respected. And you can ask me later about all the ways in which that has shown up. So what does that mean? Is you talk about in the sort of Christian tradition and the mother and women in the Christian tradition. Clearly, the symbol, right, the greatest symbol of motherhood in the Christian tradition is Mary, right? And we can look at the ways in which Christianity has been an arbiter of empire, and an arbiter of domination. And clearly, as we talk about whether we're talking about enslavement, the doctrine of discovery, just the different ways in which Christianity has provided a sacred canopy for patriarchal, imperialistic, racialized notions of over and against and of domination. That the history of the way in which Christianity has engaged with Mary has also been reflective of that, right? And so from one perspective of that sort of patriarchal, imperialistic, colonizing Christian perspective, Mary is seen as this figure that is this sort of almost sacrificial figure. I always thinking, and womenist theologians who will write about this talk about it, sort of the way she is like that enslaved woman, right? Who's uses her body is used to provide for empire. And so her body becomes a vessel and not something that is a part of a human being who is respected. And so that we see that, Mary in sort of the prevailing dominant strand of Christianity has always been this sort of sacrificial figure who never pushed back and, oh, here I am, Lord, use me, kind of virginal figure. Well, and we can see that is called women into certain roles. But on the other hand, when you look at that from the vantage point of, well, women and oppressed women, we recognize how the ways in which Mary has been distorted it signals the way in which Christianity itself has been distorted and corrupted, because Mary is the paradigm shift. if we look at and I think we'll get at it, so I'm sort of jumping ahead, we look at something like the Magnificat, right? It is very clear that Mary is talking about that which she will bring forth will take the powerful from their thrones, the rich from their thrones. There's this reversal, right? And so she begins to talk about this God of the oppressed. And that becomes, I always say the Magnificat is sort of like a precursor to Jesus' first public sermon, where Jesus will say in Luke 1:4, where Jesus will also say, I have come to set the captives free, and goes on in that regard. So Mary, to answer your question, Mary becomes a figure who is not a hidden figure, but has been a distorted figure. A distorted mother in Christianity. The other hidden figures are Hagar, right? And Hagar, she just sort of leaves the scene because it's Abraham's story, and if it's not Abraham's story, it's Sarah's story. But what happens to Hagar? So Hagar becomes another one of those significant figures and very crucial figure in womanist theology. Another one of those mothers in the New Testament is the Syrophoenician woman, right? Who comes to Jesus and asks that Jesus would heal her daughter. And, Jesus first, doesn't respond quite right. And she reminds Jesus of, really his sermon, I've come to set the captives free. But she reminds Jesus of sort of his mission. I always say his sort of male humanity got in the way there for a moment. And she calls him back. So I think, and I'll sort of, and then of course there's Ruth and Naomi. And so you have that mother, if you have all of these figures that are there that either have been distorted in the telling of a colonizing imperialistic Christianity, or have been lost in the telling in the tradition. And so I think those four, that I named, signal or symbolize that. Oh boy, I'm talking too long, but
no, this is great. I mean, it's you're calling attention to there isn't there are many mothers. There are many women within the Christian tradition that have been distorted or just have been glanced over. Their names are briefly in the text, a text that was written by men, but were critical people in the story that unfolded. But were actually protagonists, and you can see the remnants of that, and that they were even there in the text to begin with, or where it kind of comes through the white of the text, rather than the ink of the text, like where the spaces in between. I'm curious if we could go a little deeper into Mary and the Magnificat. We have here we have an art. Actually, let's hold off on screen sharing for now. Thanks. I guess just if you could speak briefly to what is the Magnificat and what is its significance to you as a womanist theologian? And how does it change this distortion of Mary for you?
Yeah, I'm Episcopalian, and so and I say that to say that sort of grew up with the Magnificat as a sort of canonical that we would say from particularly say it in morning prayer, evening prayer, and say from time to time, and especially at Advent, right? That's when we all sort of sing the Magnificat. And growing up, it didn't mean anything to me, right? It's just like, it's one of those little dry Episcopal things that we sing. And then as I moved toward the process of ordination, I started listening to it and reading it. And I'm like, oh, wow. Now, how is this at the center of our church? And our church is so daggone white and so daggone, I always say, we aren't complicit in slavery. We are the church of wealthy slaveholders and its legacy. And so early on, I didn't quite know how to take in what seemed to be this sort of contradiction, right? And so it wouldn't be until later, really, as I was doing my own women's theology and much later, that I began, and then, one day was called to preach at, I think, I don't know, whatever the Advent Sunday is that we usually focus on the Magnificat. I said, well, now let's see what is here. And Mary, the Magnificat is about the pronouncement after Mary is told in the Gospel of Luke that Mary is told that she is to bring forth this child that we will know to be Jesus and the Messiah. And Mary responds with this song. And, when you think of one who Mary was in sort of her context, here is this young teenager girl who is betrothed, as they say, to be married to Joseph, finding herself with child, right? And in that time, Joseph had a right to, one, not only obviously leave her, but also to bring her forward for quote unquote public shame, which at that time meant Mary could have been stoned to death for the crime of quote unquote, would say adultery or whatever, and bringing forth a child out of wedlock. That we have this bold, when I think of Mary now with this bold pronouncement, this canonical, it is like Mary is claiming her voice, first of all, right? It's not this, she's claiming her voice in a public way, right? She's not shrinking away. She is claiming her voice. And that takes courage in a time where that young girl could have been stoned to death. And she was a young girl. So that's the first thing that I know. Yeah, I like to say, you go ahead, Mary. And then what is it that she's saying, right? What is it that sort of that she is hearing God call her to? And she is literally saying that, you know what, through this which I bring forward, the mighty will be brought down from their thrones. She is pronouncing a reversal, a paradigm shift out of which justice will come. Now, note the irony here. This lowly woman, first of all, is whom God chooses to bring forth this savior, if you will, that will reverse, bring down, will end sort of this patriarchal kind of domination, giving us the clue as to if there's ever going to be justice, well, it's going to come from the lowliest of the low. And in that context, it's Mary. And Mary boldly claims her space and her voice to do that. So that's the thing, and Mary doesn't allow the sort of patriarchal, because it was very patriarchal, structures of her day to contain her at all. Mary could do this quite easily without Joseph. And indeed does, because she meets up with Elizabeth, who's also bringing forth John, right? And in the text, and who are the voices that are silent in these stories are the two men. Joseph's voice is silent, and Zachariah, Elizabeth's husband, they're silent. And the first time that you hear particularly Elizabeth's husband's voice is when he can finally get over his maleness and affirm what's going on in these two women. And so I like to say, from a woman's perspective, we think about how Mary claimed her space and claimed her voice as a woman in this time.
Let's center this voice then. Brittany, I'm wondering if you can bring up that slide actually, with the Magnificat. Thank you. And maybe we can just, Reverend Kelly, would you mind reading it for us?
Yeah, yeah. And Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For God has looked with favor on the lowliness," that's Mary, the lowliness of the Almighty servant. "Surely from now on, generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is God's name. God's mercy is for those who fear God from generation to generation. God has shown strength with God's arms. God has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things, sent the rich away empty. God has helped servant Israel in remembrance of God's mercy, according to God's promise made to our ancestors, for Abraham and to his descendants forever." Now, I wonder why the church didn't emphasize God has sent the rich away empty, has filled the hungry with good things, has brought down the powerful from their thrones, and lifted up the lowly. Anyway, there you have it.
Well, I mean, this is a prayer and a song that has been like outlawed by governments.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And it's incredible to read these words about, from a woman who is poor and oppressed and in a lowly station, saying, God has done mighty things for me. Like, I am blessed. Like, the change of the narrative around, like, who is graced by God. It is not the conqueror, it is the lowly.
That's right.
And
That's right.
and her naming that the tables are going to be turned, that is the prophecy, and that is a prophecy that she carries after she has been graced by God's divinity and is holding prophecy literally in her body. This is what comes through her voice. So I'm so glad to learn about this prayer and this song. And also I'll name one thing. Anytime I hear in the Bible the word Israel, I've learned from teachers, rabbis that I've studied with, that perhaps the most accurate way we can also read that is God wrestlers. That's the name for the people who are God wrestlers, who are struggling and working through the big mysteries of faith. And so, the fact that this comes through her, it just feels like an invitation for us to wrestle with, what does it mean to flip the tables?
Yeah. And Sojourner Truth once said, and we all know Sojourner Truth for quote unquote her speech, "Ain't I a Woman," that she may or may not have given. But she also said this in relationship to Mary in the Magnificat. She said, "If one woman could turn the world upside down, then all of us women together can turn it right side up again." And that one woman she's talking about, obviously, was Mary.
Well, I think we're gonna weave in the rest of our theological counsel and have a bigger conversation here. But before we do, I would love to kind of ask you, what do you think is the significance of the Magnificat to us in this moment as we seek to remove our consent from the doctrine of discovery and its power over paradigm? And what do you think the Magnificat calls us into?
Yeah, it's such a good question, right? And I like the way you talk. What does it call us into? It's one thing to be aware of the story, but what does it call us into? Let me say this, and as you talk about a doctrine of discovery, and one of the things I know you have emphasized through this class is that the way in which, and that's why I like to talk about how we create a just earth and creation justice and in God's creation, because the way these things are held together, the way in which we treat the earth and our domination over the earth is related. to the way we treat one another, right? These things are inextricably related. And the theological paradigms that have allowed us to have a relationship of domination or an over and against relationship to the earth, and that has gotten us into this creation mess, climate mess, etc. That very narrative, theological narrative, is the same narrative that, of course, has created relationships of domination and subjugation between human beings and peoples. The other thing to note is that those people who are subjugated, who are marginalized, who are oppressed by patriarchal imperialistic domination are also troped, if you will, or stereotyped as people of the earth, right? That are doing the earthy work, that work with your hands. Black women, white women wouldn't nurse their own babies because, oh, that's so sort of earthy work. And so body work. And so again, it is no accident to once again see the interrelationship between those people who have been dominated, oppressed, and subjugated, and the way in which we have subjugated and dominated the earth, because those people are seen as earth people, if you will, in that regard. And so what the Magnificat calls us into, which is always easier said than done because we've all been socialized into this kind of paradigm of thinking. It has become a part of our own sort of consciousness, our collective consciousness, and our own sort of individual consciousness. So we have to be intentional. We can't uproot something out there. We've got to uproot it from within us. We've got to, as Audre Lorde said, we've got to begin to sort of unearth, if you will, that piece of the oppressor that is inside of all of us. And so we have to be very intentional about recognizing and calling out the ways in which we see and relate and move in the world ourselves. That even unconsciously we do that in this sort of way in which we aren't with, but we're over and against. And so that to me is the first thing that it calls us to. And then, the Magnificat, to me, calls us to the courage to show up in a different way. That took courage to show up on the public square in a hostile world in a different way, in a way which was more life-giving. Because that's what Mary does. She gives as a life giver, and on various levels of that, right? Not simply in birthing Jesus, but a life giver in birthing new life into the world. What kind of new life into the world? A life of justice. So that's it. So we have to have the courage to show up in the world in a different way, in a way that indeed does the work that you all are emphasizing here. The work of being life givers. And to be a life giver is to always foster the peace that is justice, calling us into relationships of equality, reciprocity, and mutuality with one another and with the earth. There was a final thing that the other thing that it calls us to is we are always to be called to the side of those who are always on the underside of justice. That is the only way forward toward a more just earth. It's in the Black faith tradition say Jesus wasn't born in Herod's palace, he was born in a manger. Right? It's the only way. And if God can do anything, God could have just popped Jesus out from nowhere, but God chose that Jesus was going to come through the lowliest of low, this woman. That tells us something. We should all, when we're trying to figure out, well, what do we do this or do we do that? What's the right decision? What's the right policy? Whatever we're trying to figure out, what's the right law? What's the right policy? We are called to always examine that from the vantage point of the people who would be on the underside. Yes, I don't have to say anymore. That's what Mary reminds us of. So those are the things that I would lift up. That's our call, to show up differently, to have the courage to do so, to look at ourselves, the way in which we have been socialized into a particular way of being and consciousness in the world with intentionality, and to always ask ourselves, who are the least of these as we move about trying to create a more just earth.
Wow. Yeah. I'm sitting with so much that you've said, and I'm actually I'm guessing that people are gonna want to be with some of this on their own. We were gonna weave in our theological council right now, but I think we're gonna do breakouts first and then weave in our theological council, just so folks don't have so much coming at them right away. But thank you so much for this sharing. We'll come back into conversation, and I just want to name, like, I'm hearing the call around courage in the public square for standing for life, and what it means to actually be allied with those whom have been on the underside of that power structure, and that being a critical part of how we serve life. I am going to invite my friends to talk about the breakout groups that we have coming up, and then we will return to this conversation with our theological council. Amy, sounds like we've got breakout groups ready to go. Is that right?
That is right. If you find yourself in the wrong group, come back to the main room and we'll get you in the right group. And if you've come in the last 10 minutes or so, you might not find yourself in a group. So just hang tight, and I will get you in a group. We do have a group for BIPOC only folks. If you want to be in that group and I don't know it yet, stay in the main room and tell me, and I will get you in that group. And if you don't want to be in a breakout room during this time and you want to just take some, a quiet breather, just stay in the main room with us.
And if you get into your room and no one's there yet, just hold tight. Someone will probably be there. They just might need to accept their invitation. And our question for you right now is,
I'm sorry, Sarah.
Yes.
I changed it to flow.
What?
Can I share the question? Because
Sure, go for it.
Here you go. So Reverend Kelly, you talked a lot about this call that the Magnificat is making to remother. So where do you see that call alive, whether that's in yourself, in the world, in your notion of God? Where is the call to remother alive right now? And what would that ask of you?
Okay, we're going to be in these groups for 15 minutes. So let's go ahead and get into it. Please choose a timekeeper so that folks have equal amounts of time, depending on how number of people to share. And we'll come back with our theological council to deep into some of this conversation. And the Magnificat, if you want to reference it, it's in the chat. There's a link to it in the chat. All right. With that, I think let's open the breakout rooms and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Welcome back. Welcome back. Seems folks are trickling back in. Hope you are having some good conversations. I would love to invite our theological council up here with me to continue this conversation, you know, about remothering our theology, about Mary, about why Mary, you know, and yeah, we'll be here with Reverend Kelly as well. I'm gonna, we don't have too much time, only about 15-ish minutes. So I'm just gonna lay out some questions or some notes and then see where you all go with it. But you know, this question that we're asking in this session, what does it mean to remother our theology, remother our sense of God? What does it mean to remother the world in this moment? And for those of you who might have a relationship with Mary, who is she to you? What does she offer to us that is missing when we internalize or have inherited a patriarchal Father God? And where or where do we find mothering God traditions in Christianity that might not have been named about yet in this conversation with Reverend Kelly? And just want to specifically lift up, you know, we haven't talked yet about the Black Madonna, but you know, that is something certainly to look at. You know, in movement spaces, we hear that when Black women are free, we will all truly be free. We also hear from science how our common ancestry, you know, comes from Black women. Black women hold the mitochondrial DNA for every permutation of human being in their blood. So, you know, there's that piece about the Black Madonna and how you're making sense of that. And then there's also these questions of, you know, the mother goddess of pre-Christian Europe or Christian Europe as well. And there's this idea that I'd love to lift up from our friend Sylvia Lindstedt, who studies myth and the goddesses of Europe, of when Christianity became co-opted by empire and was, you know, imposed upon the world, including Europe, that the goddesses of the old goddesses, many of them hid in the skirts of Mary and are there. So that's just a hodgepodge of stuff. What does this bring up for you? What's your response to this conversation? Whoever's hot can pop.
Well, I thank you, Kelly, and thanks everybody. In that context of what you just said, so I go back to, you know, the way I identify as a woman often is to say I'm holy earth surface walker, life bringer, life bearer, and I stand with the full authority of this Mother Earth behind me, and it is my place always to speak on behalf of life in every circumstance. And if we are taking action and making decisions that do not place life at the center, it is my place to say we must begin again. So that comes from a lot of time spent in Indigenous ceremony. And I'll say, though, as I listen, that the authority of the life bringer has been eroded, certainly even within Indigenous ceremonial life. What often happens is there's a reference to how, so the male men who are presiding over the ceremonies will say at the beginning, this altar was brought by a woman. So they make that acknowledgement, but then from there on in the ceremony, the women don't have the freedom. And so I really felt that grief just when you were speaking for some reason, Sarah. Like it got really sharp in this context. And so I'll just say that you know, I also spoke with a young woman who was premiering a video with my daughter, and she was talking about how the land is talking to her. So this is how it's coming up, is, you know, and same for me, the mountain is talking to me, and it's not talking in terms of races either. It's talking about human beings. And that's not popular right now for land back, for me to say that it's not talking about my specific people, it's talking about human beings, right? But anyway, so this young girl is hearing these visions, and her and the people surrounding her and her tribal council is telling her, who are you? Who are you to be having a vision? And I found myself sitting bolt upright and saying, that is the poorest of manners from one indigenous person to another, to question or to deride, to shut down in any way a vision coming from a young woman such as yourself, who is hearing the land right now. That is not okay. So I just found myself standing like fiercely, and she just cried her eyes out, because I say, you know, we are the receivers and the dreamers for the people. And I have a whole talk about what that is in menstruation, but then beyond menstruation. So I guess I'm just really feeling how, I mean, just in case anybody thinks that it's all ready made for someone like me, I got my stuff to work out too, with where did the medicine of the divine feminine get, how did the muzzle get put on her even in our ceremonies, right? So just noticing that.
Pat, you put a new lens on what I was thinking with when Reverend Kelly Brown Douglas was helping us go into this Magnificat and ask ourselves the question, where do we feel drawn to those places of the rich and powerful, or to the places of the lowly and the hungry? And I pulled out my Gospel of Luke in front of me as we were thinking with it, and I saw Elizabeth in a new way, and I saw the role of women supporting each other in a new way. The sense of Elizabeth greeting Mary, and Elizabeth herself being filled with the Holy Spirit, and that exchange of energy. Mary was speaking forward a powerful prophecy, but she wasn't alone in this context, in the story context. So I'm placing myself with the elder Elizabeth, and really asking myself the question, is there something that I'm being called to in lifting up the voice of those who are lifting up the lowly, who are lifting up the hungry? And from my positionality, the ways that my own life and my own location often invites me to stand with those who are powerful and who are rich. And I think it's an ongoing invitation, right, to find myself in the space of those who are willing to speak forward with that courage, and that my role might be aligned with Elizabeth, allowing that to happen intergenerationally. There's a lot that has been opened up with this ancient text, but remothering to me would look like mothering one another, at least in part.
Yeah, I will jump in. When we were sharing, Kelly, I was thinking about how you said that the Magnificat is a bold pronouncement. And I kind of looked at it. What was coming up in me is looking at this Magnificat as a mystical articulation that in which Mary consents to give birth to the Christ consciousness. And I was asking myself, well, this is our task too. And how do we come to that kind of courageous consent to give birth to a Christic consciousness that links in with the activism that we put forth. Where is the activism coming from? But the need to come from a Christic consciousness. And then I was like, well, what is a Christic consciousness? How could we define that? And thinking about perhaps there are probably many ways, but it's a consciousness of deep relationality with the totality of life, with the earth community, with one another, with all the differentiated aspects of the revelations of divinity that we are interwoven with. And it's a consciousness in which everything is alive. It's a consciousness of wholeness and unification and justice. But it's a consciousness that originates within the self. And there's a lot, I think you spoke, Kelly, about how we have to see the patriarchy within the self, and we have to start to work on the patterns that are alive, very much alive in ourselves, however gross or subtle, at an interior level. And I was thinking about Mary as that which offers the world substance. And the substance or the revelation comes from a deeper place. It may come from, particularly coming from a perhaps silence as an aspect of where our deeper revelations can come from as we go forward. And how can we provide or be in silence together, maybe provide ways of collective deep dives into the heart of mystery, and what can we draw up from those deeper places to articulate and how to move in the world together from that place of substance, silence and not noise, so that what we do is not noisy, but has actual depth, actual capacity, because we're in such a critical time planetarily where we face, we're in tremendous collapses, as we know. So I'm kind of inside of all of that, that challenge of the bold pronouncement. And so thank you so much, Kelly, for all that you presented, and Sarah too, for all those questions. There's so much to tend to. Thank you.
Hey crew, I'm crashing in from the tech side. And I just wanted to weave one thing that's coming in to us on the tech chat side. And I'm sure you can weave this in your reflections, which is some people are joining saying, hey, wait, I'm not Christian, or I'm not a mom. And so I just want to say from the course side, to those of you that feel that way right now in this course, and I'm sure the Theological Council can speak better to this than I can, the work of this course is how do we subvert and move beyond the structures of empire and patriarchy that shape our world, our lives, and our power structure. And one of those centers of power is this faith tradition. And many of the sisters and siblings on this call come from that. And so we want to speak and be in the practice of what does subversion and reclamation of power in the belly of the tradition that claims that it brought the doctrine of discovery over. We want to be in that practice. And so if this doesn't resonate with your faith lineage, I just have two quick invitations to you. One, this can be a time of prayer and sending power to sisters on the inside who are doing this version of the subversive work. And two, an invitation to contemplate, what does that look like in my own line, in my own tradition? I think there is deep wisdom in this for all of us. And this is a disciplined practice of subversion. So just want to make that invitation and send some love to those in the chat who were sharing some confusion. That is our explanation of the choice, and Pat has a illustration. What's this?
I'm just showing something from my lineage that I'm looking at during this conversation. This is Changing Woman, who is our creatrix, who created the first human beings, and she was located. Her positionality was in the center between these four mountains, that then gave instruction to our people. So just to say, I'm riding along here, and following your suggestion, Brittany, of kind of translating or understanding the relevance in my own tradition. Yeah.
And can
Go
I
ahead.
jump in?
Yes, please, Kelly.
I'm also a Luddite, so I'm looking for the place to raise my hand. So I have to do it the old-fashioned way and raise my hand. So I'm sorry for that. But yeah, I appreciate the folks who want to be clear that they are Christian, and this isn't meant to be sort of a Christocentric, if you will, space, and even calling people in it as if, because I always say, look, that's what the world of religions is all about. We all engage our own spirituality in the way that makes sense, and to recognize, and I'm a Christian, so I can critique it hard, to recognize that when we do, just Brittany, I'm really emphasizing what you've said or highlighting, when we do talk about these structures of domination, we have to recognize that Christianity has provided the sacred canopy that has legitimated these structures of domination, that Christianity has been the prevailing religion of power. And we've got to name that, we've got to recognize that, and I'd say those of us who are Christian have a special responsibility. If that's not what Christianity is, then we have a responsibility to be out in the forefront, on the public square, putting forth a different narrative and a different understanding. And so to me, this discussion is about recognizing the role of Christianity in providing the theological legitimation for a destructive, dominating, sinful power, because anything that disrespects in any way creation and other human beings, as far as I'm concerned, is sinful. And so, and Christianity has played a significant role. The last thing that I'll say about that, especially in this time, when once again the reality of Christian nationalism has reared its head. And so, so that's a part of changing this paradigm of domination. So I appreciate the recognition of Christianity's role, bringing us to this place that we are.
Thank you, Kelly. Sarah, I'm curious, if I'd love to weave you in and just to kind of recenter in this inquiry, you know, of remothering, our sense of place in the world, our sense of God, if that is a thing that resonates, and you know, where do we find what can be offered from our own traditions, whether that's Mother Mary or something else, to help us in this work.
I remember when you first asked that question, Sarah Jane, I was like, but the mother's already here. Like, we don't remother. Like, we don't have to do anything. Like, she's already here and present. And in every breath we take, and in every new baby, and in every death, right? Like, the mother is here. We have a lot to do to open ourselves to being mothered in a healthy way and to receiving the mothering that the divine feminine is offering us, right? Like, there is a return to the mother that's like, regardless of our tradition, that we can do. And in my work, I've been incredibly fortunate to work with folks from across multiple faith traditions, and really want to like acknowledge all the work being done across many, from Islam to multiple forms of animist traditions, to recenter animism within those traditions and to find it again, to see where it is. And it's very inspiring to me. And to find the voice of the divine feminine that's there. I myself come from I grew up, I think many people, I devoted myself to the divine feminine before I had any names for her when I was on 6 or 7. And I grew up in a Quaker family. when Quakers are part of the Anabaptist movement, the Peace Church. And I went to Christian seminary, I went to Union, which is where I discovered womanism. And it's also where I discovered the Bible, because as some of you may know, Quakers don't, at least the Quaker tradition I came from, doesn't read much of the Bible. And I certainly knew nothing about Mary. And I was fortunate that Union had quite a number of wonderful Catholics who helped introduce me to Mary. And I was like, oh, maybe Luther missed a few things. And then I myself am a very witchy animist person, and am supporting people in that pathway. And I'm edge walking like many people. I'm going in between these different spaces. And so within the Quaker tradition, I just wanted to speak to that kind of briefly. Like, we tend to feel very proud of ourselves and do a fair amount of quiet self-congratulation in being such spearheads in social justice work. And of course, Quakers today, as some of you know and are well aware of, are doing a tremendous amount of work to look at our own role in perpetuating the doctrine of discovery, in perpetuating racism, in perpetuating boarding schools in the context of the United States and Canada, and to look at what does it mean to retell our own story about what does it mean to, like, the ways in which we have actually perpetuated the seeds of violence instead of planting the seeds of peace. But in the context of remothering ourselves, there's an image that's very common amongst Quakers, and I mention this from this very tiny tradition to this much broader audience, because I'm wondering if it might resonate something for you. They say that one of the founders of Quakerism, George Fox, he was searching for a vision. And in searching for a vision, he went to the top of a hill known as Pendle Hill in England. And that site, in that place, he had a great vision, a vision of a great people to be gathered, to be brought to Christ, to learn the truth that God is within every person, not far away, and not to be found through the priests, but through your own direct experience. And the way that story is told, Pendle Hill has become a place of pilgrimage for many Quakers today. And I myself have been on pilgrimage there. And it was one of my elders, one of my witchy elders in the Quaker tradition, who told me, you know, Pendle Hill, if you're not Quaker, by most people in the English countryside, is known as a place where the witches gathered. And I began to wonder, what if that vision that George Fox had came from the land itself? What if the Holy Spirit was speaking to Fox in the way he best understood? What if I reimagine my tradition and I recenter the land and the water and the trees? What is revealed to me about what the Spirit is saying and doing? Offer that as an invitation to you all about remothering your own tradition, to ask, what is the land saying? And how is Spirit speaking? How are these visions coming from the land herself?
Thank you, Sarah, for modeling that in your own tradition, that reimagining, that search for mother law. We have to wrap up, but if I would say, Pat or Kelly, if you have a haiku level closing words or thoughts for this council, I would certainly invite them, and then we'll move towards looking to what's next in this series.
Well, one thing that was coming up with, I'm really loving, Gail, you talking about Mary consented to birthing a consciousness. And I was thinking, what, you were asking, what is Christ consciousness? And so I was thinking about how I was in a ceremony and this woman said to us, it was only women in that ceremony, and she said, if we could create an unshakable sisterhood, everything would heal. And so I wonder if that's a beginning. So many times when I'm working with other women, that's what I ask myself. Is this moving towards an unshakable sisterhood or away from an unshakable sisterhood? And so maybe that's a grounding, at least for our community here, to think about as a part of birthing, the continuation of the birthing of this consciousness that has come in so many forms. So many forms of like the blue corn mothers, the jaguar mothers. Here's my corn mother here. Changing woman, white buffalo calf woman, and from traditions all over the world, there have been these spirit helpers that have come in some version of a form of the feminine.
Thank you, Pat. I think that is the goal, moving towards an unshakable sisterhood. And when we're missing the mark there, how do we correct so that is what we're doing here? That feels like a centering question for this entire movement. Kelly, do you have any last words or thoughts to share?
No, just, the intentionality of being committed to fostering a more just earth. And we know that the beginning of that, if we take Mary seriously, the beginning of that is taking seriously what it truly means to be a life giver, giving, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Reverend Kelly, for joining us today and being our speaker. Thank you so much for the work you do. And thank you to our Theological Council once again for joining. We're just gonna wrap up with some notes around what's happening next, because as we mentioned, we are nearing the close of this foundational course, this starter series, and we want to put you at ease in terms of, oh no, it's ending. What does that mean? Like we're not done yet. We got more to do, and there's more to come. So with that, what's coming up next? If we can pull up those slides, great. We have next week our pop-up 1-hour session, which is just going to be for dialogue in small groups and in the large group. That is really going to be about how are we moving personally and collectively? What next steps are arising as we consider what it means to remove our consent from the ways of domination, to reawaken the seeds of mother law in our own lineage and beyond? And what does it mean to stand in power and solidarity together? These are 3 kind of buckets that we've identified that hopefully are helpful for you as we begin to find our way towards what is next. And that is something that we will be supporting you all in, with small groups that you get to choose the different subject matter and dig into next week. It'll just be 1 hour, so please make sure to show up on time, otherwise you might miss it. So 4 o'clock Eastern next week. And then 2 weeks after that, we will be closing formally this starter series with Michelle Shenandoah with a discussion about how are we moving into right action. This is where the ideas from the praxis session that's next week will be rising up and informing this conversation with Michelle. And we will be looking at the movement context, this line of generations that we are in the midst of as we do this work. And then, of course, after that close, there will be ways to stay connected. There will be upcoming offerings this fall and this winter for continuing to metabolize, continuing to connect. So just know those things are happening. And then in terms of what to do between now and next week, or now and Complicit No More, moving into right action on the 28th, we'd love to invite you to some homework. One option is, if you haven't read the Mother Law article that we sent out after session 4, we invite you to read it. We hope that it's a helpful kind of summary of so much of what has been happening here. It won't contain it all, but it'll hopefully be a really helpful anchor or touchstone. Secondly, just feel your feelings and connect with what's changing in you. Start to consider what might be arising for you in terms of an anchor for you as we close this series, whether that is a mantra or a commitment or a practice, an altar item that can be a visual reminder for you of what this has meant to you. So begin to consider what that might be. And similarly, consider what next steps might be arising, whether that is about removing consent, reanimating mother law, or standing in solidarity. And we really want to help with this. It can be really tough to think about what next steps are because the problem is so big. It's like we feel like we have to be heroic and in our commitments. And we really want to support you all in thinking about your own place and your own lane and your own spheres of influence. Have more of an ecological lens on what you're moving into, what your next steps are, rather than trying to be a hero. But we're all going to be heroes together. But let's right size ourselves and find the things that are most alive in the context that we live. So again, the homework is read the article if you haven't, connect with your feelings and what's changing in you, and maybe try to find that touchstone. Connect with people who are also part of this course to discuss these things. And then consider what next steps or personal commitments are arising for you. And we'll dig into those next week. Okay. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Brittany for a little closing ritual, closing moment.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to return us to these really quick. In the article, if you haven't read it, we sort of break down what it is that we're trying to do together into 3 anchors and guideposts. Removing our consent from the systems that we have inherited. Reawakening seeds of our own mother lines, our own authority in service of a new paradigm. And standing together in that unshakable sisterhood. As we turn from this experience of receiving much teaching and toward the discernment of what now is ours to do, these are the 3 guideposts that we want to sink into. Removing our consent, reawakening the seeds of our mother lines, and standing together in an unshakable sisterhood. And so we're just going to take 2 more minutes. If you can stay past the hour, to feel into just beginning that discernment together in this space. Which one of these anchors feels like it's calling you? And that might feel scarier or sort of tingly. I'm an athlete, so I get kind of that sense of adrenaline. What's the one that you think, oh gosh, that one would really call me to grow, to do this work, this hard work of wholeness? And we're just going to take 5 breaths, with whichever thread is trying to have a conversation with you. Breathing in the wisdom and strength of our peers and elders in this course. And breathing out, trust. Breathing in wisdom. Breathing out, trust. Breathing in wisdom. And breathing out, trust. The first step of all our discernment is to ask Spirit wholeheartedly, what is mine to do? What is ours to do? So the invitation now is simple, which is to stay breathing in wisdom, breathing out trust, and to linger in silence after you leave this Zoom call. Give yourself 1 minute to begin this discernment, to begin the work that is yours to do as we prepare to form an unshakable sisterhood. Blessings. We will see you in 1 week.